Hi there. Welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast with Lisa Schlossberg. I'm your host, Lisa Schlossberg, a licensed social worker, certified health coach, personal trainer, and yoga instructor. If you, like I have, struggle with your relationship with food, eating, and body image, I am here with this podcast to guide you into healing the relationship you have with yourself through a trauma-informed, holistic, and mind-body-soul approach. Together, we can support you in building a lifestyle of more peace, freedom, safety, and power. Hello again, and welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast. This is your host, Lisa Schlossberg, and we are back today with solo series episode 15. Woohoo! I am very excited to be here. There's a lot I want to share with you today. So I honestly don't want to waste any time. I just want to kind of dive in. I do want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. I definitely feel like we are in it together. And I'm also acknowledging again the lack of microphone because I am currently recording from my friend's apartment again in Austin, Texas. I am escaping the winter in New York. And it's fantastic, but the only thing I don't have is my microphone. But like I said last time, the show must go on. That's what we're here to do. So let's do it. All right. First things first, as I was listening to the previous episode, I thought, you know what I can share with you? That is the speech that I gave. If you're not getting enough of me and you want more, I was thinking about how on semester at sea, because I was talking to you about my experience and going abroad with an eating disorder and what that was like for me. And then I remembered that the speech I gave, this was the first speech that I ever gave, I did on semester at sea. And that is available on YouTube. So if you want to check out Lisa Schlossberg, motivational speech, I think is what it's called. And that was from 2014. And that will talk about my weight loss and world travel. That's what I called it, I think. So as I was listening to it and just like reminiscing on what that time in my life was like and what I was doing at the time. And like I said, I think in the last episode, like I knew that I was going through recovery. I knew that I was healing. And in that speech is where I really talk about that. So it's still available if you want to go check that out. All right, now having said that, I mentioned in my last episode that this keeps, I'm keeping myself on track. I'm not getting too derailed, but at the same time, things keep coming to me that I want to share, and I'm just going to stick them in here. So in my last episode, I mentioned briefly that I wrote my college essay, like my application essay for the Common App, about my weight and my personality and having to kind of figure out who I am outside of my body. So naturally, I felt compelled to go into the archives of my life and find my Common App essay. And this is such a journey, you guys. This is a wild ride putting these episodes together. And so I decided that I'm going to read that to you too, just to give you an idea of, again, like what this has all been like for me. And it's relatively brief compared to, the long essay I read you last time. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to dive into that really quick and then get into the rest of it. Okay, here's my essay. On March 25th, 1993, I weighed 7 pounds and 11 ounces. That is probably the last time I weighed what I was supposed to. Throughout my life, I have viewed my large size as my only huge flaw. Admittedly, I have atrocious handwriting, I always overpack, and I've been biting my nails since I could chew. But while I viewed these as negligible imperfections, my weight always kept me down. No pun intended. For many years, it was the reason I disrespected myself, lost patience with myself, and wanted to change who I was. It was not easy walking around knowing that I did not physically fit in, but I accepted it. I turned my burden into a blessing, and I made it work. I understood that fitting in physically was not ultimately how I would feel comfortable around people, so I found my own way. I had to cultivate my personality so that people would look beyond what they saw and give the girl in front of them a chance to be judged by more than just her appearance. At least that's how it felt. Then I found it. my golden ticket to confidence. It was not wrapped in a chocolate bar. It was inside of me. So I guess at one point it probably was wrapped in a chocolate bar. The one thing that appeals to everyone, that everyone longs for, that I knew how to offer at all times, everywhere I went, and one of the only universal languages: humor. I stopped getting nervous in front of crowds. I began introducing myself with confidence, and I appealed to almost everyone instantly, all thanks to my sense of humor. I thrive on other people's laughter, the sound of it, the sight of it, and the feeling I get when successfully triggering anything from hysterics to mere chuckles. I have made a reputation for myself as the witty, clever, funny one, almost everywhere I've been. Laughter eases tension, breaks the ice, and never fails to lighten the mood. When I realized I could use my sense of humor to feel accepted and then comfortable around people, I built up enough confidence to be myself in social situations. I am relaxed, personable, outgoing, and understanding. I have become more attuned to other people's insecurities, and my sense of empathy is enhanced. I have evolved into a good listener and a solid friend. I'm a mediator, advice giver, and support provider. I do not let people take advantage of me. I am determined and I am strong. And I'm funny. Maybe I would have developed into this person regardless of how I looked, but something tells me that I nurtured this part of me because I could not turn to my looks or appearance for gratification. I satisfy myself by being a good person rather than having a good reflection. Humidity may ruin my hair, stress may give me a pimple or two, and the rain may smear my makeup, but nothing can diminish who I've become. Ultimately, my body gave me the chance to become a person I value. As a result, I have developed a deeper sense of self-respect, a better understanding of myself, and a stronger sense of self-identity. I am happier with myself than some of the most physically attractive people I know. Perhaps my shoes are wider and my clothes are bigger, but so is my personality, and that I would not change. Okay, so that was my Common App essay. And I read this and I'm like, she's so cute. And what I find fascinating about it now, and again, it's like I could do entire episodes about some of this stuff, and I'm not going to get sucked into it. But what I do find fascinating is that I remember I read through this a few years ago, and I remember thinking about, I was looking at it through the lens of kind of like codependency and people pleasing. Because I remember thinking and coming to this awareness and this realization that was very confronting to me at the time about how it felt as though the personality that I created was more of a persona. And that, I was using things like humor or being the class clown and the life of the party and friends with everyone. And I built this persona from a foundation of feeling so unsafe to be myself and to be seen because of my body. And I viewed that at the time as a negative thing, that I wasn't being honest and I wasn't being authentic. I was being this version of myself that I felt like I had to be. And I think that that's true for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. But I think that, if we look at just the media and what exists, there is the character in so many movies and films and shows, because I remember writing about this in college, that is the fat character also being the funny one. And so it's not, I know that it's not just me, and that's part of why I wanted to voice this and bring it into the conversation. But so anyway, so it's like years ago, I went back and looked at this, and I was in this place of, oh God, I was so inauthentic, and I was just performing. I was always performing. And there's truth to that, the same way that, I was just so in denial and things like that, like I talked about in the last episode. But now what I find fascinating about it is it's both. It's like, yes, it was a lot of performing and people pleasing and molding myself and, kind of being a chameleon depending on the social circle I was with or the environment that I was in. How did I have to perform in order to feel safe? There was that. And at the same time, there's also truth to, I had to know who I was, and I had to quote unquote build or cultivate a personality outside of my looks. And there's truth to that, and that's exactly what it was. And so it's like all of it together. And now I understand being at a place where it's not good or bad, it's not right or wrong, it's just all of it together. It was kind of a performative persona, but it also allowed me to connect with parts of me that were way beyond my physical body. And so, just like I was saying in the last episode, it was a lot of denial, but then that also afforded me an opportunity to identify as way more than my physical. And so just again, it's like a snapshot of how I viewed things and looked at things and myself and positioned myself and my identity in the world. And I think that again is like really true. That's what I remember it feeling like. And then when I was listening to the last one and I was letting all of this kind of marinate, the other thing that I thought about was Gary V, who I've brought up on this podcast before, Gary Vaynerchuk. Again, you don't have to have any idea who he is, but something that I've heard him say, and I was looking for the exact video, but I can't find it. But I remember watching a video of him saying, I feel really sorry for the kids that grow up attractive and athletic and, like get good grades and all that stuff. I feel sorry for them because at a certain point, you graduate school and then you're not getting grades anymore. You're not playing sports anymore. And you have no idea who you are, because you spent your entire childhood identifying as those things, as being a good athlete, as getting good grades, as this, as that. And if you are someone that grew up defining yourself by being attractive, that can easily lend itself to quite the identity crisis later in life. And so I remember watching this video of his and feeling so seen and understood from this lens of, again, I couldn't use any of that. I couldn't use any of that to feel good about myself. I couldn't use any of that to define myself. And so I didn't really have that problem. I did have that problem in plenty of other ways, but this is all, again, about my relationship with, ultimately, again, the reason all of this is coming into the conversation is because this is about feeling safe in my body. Feeling safe in my body as a foundation for getting to a point where I am now, like, there is no more weight to lose. And if you follow me on Instagram, you saw this potentially come up now that you're hearing this, probably a couple months ago. But I am now at a place, according to the fancy gym at the machine that tells me all the stats about my body fat percentage and this and that, I'm under 17% body fat. And the reason I'm telling you that, I don't know what my BMI is. I don't even know exactly what I weigh. But all of this is to say that me feeling safe in my body as it is and as it was before this most recent intentional weight loss was the reason that I could get to this low of a body fat and to be in a body that looks so lean and strong and athletic. All of this is about feeling safe. And I think a lot of that has to be defining yourself outside of your body. So this is your invitation to start doing that or practicing that if it is relatively new to you to think of yourself that way. And this is why, like, again, in module 1 of my coaching program, there is a conversation and a homework assignment dedicated to your body versus you the human versus you the body. Because for a lot of us, we're not even used to thinking about ourselves as that. But now you've heard me say for a million weeks in a row, you're a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context. And this is what it means to really come back to who the fuck you are. You are a spirit, you are a soul, and you're living in a body. So anyway, that's how we're going to start this episode. Okay, moving on. Now, I also was thinking about my experience on semester at sea, and there's more I want to say about all of it. But again, for the purpose of keeping myself kind of on track, there's just some bullets that were coming to me as I was sitting with all of this and kind of reprocessing. When I was on semester at sea, in a lot of ways, it felt like a microcosm of the world because my experience on semester at sea was like a container. I think there were about 500 or so students and a few hundred more other people on the ship. There were professors, and then there were lifelong learners is what they called them. So just people that like wanted to be on the ship and contribute to the experience. And then there were some families as well. So it was like an interesting mix of like, it wasn't just the students. It was really, it felt like a microcosm of the world. It was like this little planet on a ship. And again, it was contained. It was like the same people, and it was a defined period of time. And so it was like a unique experience where it was way smaller, of course, than the University of Michigan. And this was the first time and place that I had entered into an environment as a thin person. So growing up, I was always overweight, and through, elementary school and middle school and high school and college, the beginning of college and sleepaway camp and traveling abroad and like everywhere that I had been in my life until this point, I was overweight. And then I had this opportunity to enter into this container that reflected and represented kind of the world. And now in my experience, what I felt was now I fit in. Now I looked like everyone else. And so I found it really interesting how when I would meet people, it felt like coming from the experience of losing all my weight while I was in college, and especially in a sorority in college, which was like a bubble within a bubble. And again, it's like I could write an entire novel about what that was like, but that's not what this episode is for. But coming from the amount of like attention and praise and just reward that I was getting everywhere I went on campus, now I was at semester at sea and no one even knew that I had just lost all of this weight. And that was really just like an interesting time. And so the reason I'm saying this again is because I started to witness the way that my role in society, in the social context, felt like it was changing. And I didn't know, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand because I had been, again, so in denial of the social context in which I lived. Now things were shifting and changing, and I didn't have any language for it. I had no framework for it whatsoever. And it was a very confusing time. And what I wrote down when I was thinking about it was, it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And at the same time, I didn't even know what it was. Like my identity, my personality, my role, my persona, my, I don't even, my sense of self. Like I was so confused, but there was something very real happening. There was something very real happening that I couldn't identify or put my finger on. And ultimately now I understand that it was the way that the world and people in general were responding to me very differently. And it was the way that I was responding to the world very differently. And it was just so fucking confusing. And so I want to say a little bit more about all of this, like, again, this kind of waking up to reality and waking up to society and myself within it, because I really do think this is very important stuff to pay attention to, especially if, you're not used to thinking of it this way. So what I also want to share about this period of time, this is like junior year, semester at sea, senior year of college. I remember one of the things, like I had said again in the previous episode, I'm the least I've ever weighed and the least happy I've ever been. And part of that was that my eyes were not just opening to the world and the society around bodies and weight and shape and size, but the social context in general. And I remember going to my therapist at a certain point and having such a crisis around how the world works in general. And I remember semester at sea in many ways opened my eyes to this, because I'll just share briefly, when I was in Ghana, I have like a specific memory of being in Ghana. And again, this is not anything, I'm not saying anything about the country or the people or any, this was my lived experience. I remember one of the days that we were getting off the ship in Ghana, and there was like a line of taxi drivers, and like two of them were almost like fighting each other. Like it was almost like a physical fight to see who could drive us, the largely white folk from America, into town or something. And it just felt so aggressive and scary and violent and rooted in so much like scarcity. It was like that, like they were fighting each other to get our money, essentially. And I remember, some of you may have heard this story when I was on Nicole Sachs's podcast, because this is where all my IBS symptoms started. I had an iron stomach before a semester at sea. And so this was like the origin story. But when I thought about what it was like being in Ghana, my experience was, again, this deep grief around, why is it that I with white skin and so much privilege get to be on this cruise ship traveling the world, when other people in other places have to face so much oppression? Like nothing is fair. Nothing is fair. And I didn't deserve any of this, and I didn't earn any of this. I was lucky enough to be born to the people that created me in the time and place that I exist in. Like I didn't do anything to get any of this. And back to my experience of powerlessness, there's nothing I can do to change it. Like what am I, how? And I remember saying at the time, how does anyone live here? Like is anyone aware of all of this? And so again, I'm saying this because it wasn't just bodies and weight and BMI and like all that I was waking up to. It was everything about the social context. And it was, again, it was my weight loss that woke me up to this. And I started seeing it everywhere. And it just felt like the world was so unfair. And did anyone have any idea how unfair things were? And why are we not doing more to help people and improve the conditions around the world? Like, so this is why when I told this story at the beginning of my IBS symptoms, is like, this was not just about food and eating and my weight. This was the existential crisis that I could not process. Like I could not wrap my head around this stuff. And it was, I mean, overwhelming is such an understatement. It was just truly so much more than I could process. And so that's how it affected my body and other things. But I remember it was so uncharacteristic of me to make the decision to not even get off the ship the last day that we were in Ghana. Like I didn't even leave. And that was crazy because again, I had this amazing opportunity and I was traveling the world and I wanted to see everything and experience everything. And by the time I think we were there for like 5 or so days, I didn't even get off the ship because I couldn't. I felt so defeated. I felt so depressed. I felt so disheartened. I was in such a tough place because my eyes were open and I couldn't unsee it and I didn't know what to do with it. And I remember spending, I think it was like $20 or something for like 7 minutes on the phone from the middle of the ocean to talk to my parents, because I remember being like, what do we do? How do you exist here? How do you live here in this world where nothing is fair? And so the reason that I'm saying all this is because then I started noticing it everywhere. And one of the things that I remember going to my therapist about at the time was I was so disheartened by things like racism and sexism and poverty and injustice. Like it just felt like that I was seeing it everywhere and I had never seen it before. And so again, back to what I was saying in the last one, I was having this experience where it felt like the world outside of me was not any different than it ever was. There was always racism. There was always poverty. There was always injustice. But I didn't know it. I didn't see any of it. And I was in denial of all of it. And so, again, it wasn't just waking up because now people are living in bodies and I'm noticing things like that. But it was so much more than that. And then I remember, I think it was senior year of college, where I ended up taking Sociology 101, which I remember at the time, like, I don't know, it probably fulfilled some credit requirement or something. And I remember saying at the time that Sociology 101 is what I would call, if I could rename the class, I would call it Common Sense 101. Because I was so in denial. I was so defensive that sociology was like even a thing. Like, what, the study of society? What even is that? Like, it was so full of judgment. But again, just like defense. And then I remember, I was like, honestly, I'm going to be so honest with you. I think there were times that I literally smoked weed before I went to class because I was like, what am I even doing here? This is such a waste of time. And then I remember, I did some of the readings. I was still a straight A student. And we started talking about these concepts of privilege and oppression. And how some social identities, and this is module 2 of my coaching program. We did a lot of module 3, module 4, the brain science, addiction, recovery, things like that. But we didn't do a lot of module 2. So here's module 2 coming in. Privilege and oppression, and how, having a certain color skin means that you are more privileged in this social construct that we live in. And being a certain gender or presenting will also give you either a leg up or not. And so looking at things like social identities through the lens of privilege and oppression, and that also was so validating to me because we were talking about it in regards to race and sex and gender, sexual orientation, all sorts of ways that our social construct operates from this place of privilege and oppression. And I remember being like, holy shit, this is exactly what I'm experiencing. This is exactly what I've been living through. And I remember going to office hours with my professor to have conversations about it because, again, like, I had no language for it. I had no framework for it. I had no way of wrapping my head around my experience of navigating society and waking up to it. And then I'm sitting in this class that I think is total bullshit, and it's like blowing my mind. And not because it was telling me anything I didn't know, right? I did feel like it was kind of common sense. We all know white privilege exists, or, all right, some people are still really in denial of that. But at this point in my life, like, that was a truth that I knew. But so I remember going to office hours and having a conversation with my professor and basically just being like, okay, am I correct in saying that going from being, 300 pounds to half the size is an experience of going from oppressed to privileged? And we weren't talking about it through the lens of body size in my classes and in our readings and things like that. But I remember now I was like, okay, putting some dots together. This is what it's been like. And by the way, it has been fucking crazy because also this is not an experience that most people have. This is not an experience that most people have. One way of going from oppressed to privileged, for example, is if you grow up and you come from a relatively low income family or you struggle financially, right? And then you make a lot of money and now you live in the world in a totally different income tax bracket, and now you are wealthy. And that's one way that people can experience the shift from oppression to privilege. But it's not every day, right? It's not every day that you go from being male to female or female to male. It's not every day you can go from black to white or white to black. It's like a lot of these things, we don't have the experience very often of moving through a social context that doesn't change, but having a self-identity that completely shifts, and seeing how the world responds to that. And so then years later, I end up at NYU getting my master's, and I'm studying social work of all things, right? And the irony and the comedy here is never lost on me. And so I remember then, I think I've shared this before, speaking 2 years in a row, speaking at the Social Justice and Diversity Conference. That's what it was. The Social Justice and Diversity Conference. And the speech that I gave the first year that they helped me put together was exactly about this. Was about what it's like to move through the world and navigate my way through privilege and oppression as it comes to body size and weight. Because I remember thinking about back to college, in my discussion groups, one of my homework assignments, or one of the assignments they gave us, was we had to, and this is what I now do in module 2 of my program, is invite people to identify themselves based on social identities. Like, again, your gender and your skin color and things like that, your sexual orientation, religion, things like that, okay? But I remember one of the things when all of this was coming online and coming onto my radar in college was body size. And not just body size, but it was more, very often the way this is talked about, especially also kind of in the literature, is being able-bodied versus not. And so the privilege that comes with being able-bodied and the oppression of, if you're moving through the world in a wheelchair, for example, the institutionalized systemic oppression of, if you go somewhere that only has a staircase and doesn't allow for you to get in an elevator and get up to the floor that you need to get to, that would be an example of institutionalized or systemic oppression. So anyway, so I'm saying all of this because, again, I think that it really matters to understand the depth and magnitude of what we're working with and what we're really talking about. Because we're not just talking about body weight and shape and size. We're not talking about, being overweight or being underweight. That's all of it on the surface. That's the tip of the iceberg, which I think is very clear at this point. But as I'm going back and reliving some of this, it's like, this is what we're dealing with. We're not just dealing with the complex PTSD and the disrupted nervous system and the fragmentation of consciousness. This is what I'm talking about when I'm always talking about having an animal brain in a social context. If we don't look at the social context and the way that it does directly influence the way that we experience the world, we're missing something. We're missing something. And I don't think that it is responsible to have a conversation about changing your body if we're not also looking at the environment in which you are changing it. And then, okay, I will move on from this shortly, but one of the things that I was also just remembering, a very specific memory, was I was sitting on semester at sea one day. I think it was deck 7 where the pool was. We had a pool on the ship. This is so incredible. I cannot believe that I did that and that it's even a real thing. It's just absolutely amazing. So anyway, I was sitting at the pool, and that's what we did in between classes. We took classes on the ship when we weren't in port. I remember one of my friends on the ship kind of came up to me and made a joke about how I looked like I could beat the shit out of him, or something like that. Like I looked really tough and really hard and cold and I remember, kind of laughing it off or whatever. But it stuck with me. And then I remember bringing it up in my therapy and telling my therapist about it. And my take was, and I don't remember where I say things anymore, but I think I brought up here at one point, maybe I didn't, that at some point, one of my friends in middle school told me after years of friendship that the reason she was my friend was because she was intimidated by me. And I remember at the time having some awareness of like why people felt that way about me, but also kind of denying that and being like, I'm not intimidating. Like, why do people feel that way? and and so I remember bringing this comment to my therapist and kind of being like, I don't know why. Why is it that people see me this way? And I was struggling with it because when I was 300 pounds, it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like I would get a comment like that. Like, you look like you could beat the shit out of me like that. And so I was grappling with being seen in a different way and being perceived in a different way because now I was in a thinner body. And also, to be fair, a relatively fit one. And I remember my therapist asking me, what was like the situation? Like, paint the picture for me. Set the scene? And I remember being like, I was wearing aviators that were like reflective glasses. So it's like I was wearing aviators, but you couldn't see into my eyes. It was like a full kind of blue mirror. And I was wearing a black tank top that had like an outline. I think it was like of Biggie Smalls. And I was sitting there with my like, toned arms maybe crossed in front of my body. And that's why he made the comment. And I remember my therapist like helping me really put the dots together of, okay, so what you were wearing and what you looked like and how you were presenting to the world in your body language, in your clothing. So getting me to see that other people are interpreting me, which again was like a brand new idea. And at the time, it kind of woke me up to this, like, if you don't want to be perceived a certain way, like a, potentially badass bitch that can beat the shit out of people, maybe you don't want to come off that way. Like, maybe you want to pay attention to the like signals that are embedded in the choices that you make around how you show up in a social context. And again, this was just brand new information for me that I really never thought about before, which I think is why it stuck with me so much. And then what that ended up translating to was I graduated college, and one of my first jobs after college was working at the gym. And I was working as a personal trainer, but I was also working the front desk. And I feel as though I was known before or like during my life and teenage years and throughout college for having a resting bitch face. And essentially what that means is, if you've never heard this term before, that like my resting natural state, I look pissed off or I look unhappy. I don't know that that's necessarily true the same way anymore, which I also find fascinating and could talk for hours about. But at this point in time, it definitely was. And I remember having this awareness one day, because I was the brand new trainer at the gym. I wanted to acquire as many clients as I could. I also was the front desk girl. And so it's like part of my job to be not a resting bitch face all the time. And so I remember no one said anything to me. No one had to say anything to me. But I do remember waking up to the way that people were responding to me and how I was showing up. And then I realized that if what I wanted was to get clients to work with me, I had to put some awareness into, do I come off as approachable? Like, are people comfortable with me? Do people feel safe asking me questions, right? Because if there are people on the gym floor, I want to be a resource. Like, here I am to help you. I want to help you. But if you think that I look like a bitch, you're not going to come up and talk to me. And then I don't get the opportunity to help you. And I also don't get the opportunity to potentially get a paying client out of it. And so I'm putting this together like, okay. So the expression that I have on my face and the way that I dress and move and body language and facial expression, like all these things are being perceived by other people and influence the way that other people see me, talk to me, treat me. And it was like, now I'm hearing myself say all of this, and I would imagine that there are, I could judge this, or the voice of judgment is like, seriously, you never put that together, or you never thought about these things. And it's like, no, I was 21, 22 years old when I started waking up to the fact that I lived in a social context. And this is what it felt like, and this is what it sounded like. And then I also want to acknowledge that I was then receiving comments about how, I could work behind the desk at a gym because I fit the mold and I looked the part. And that if I didn't look the part, I would not have that opportunity available to me. And the same thing when I was a bartender for literally one night, I think, because I was trying to figure out how to pay off my student loans, and being a personal trainer wasn't necessarily going to do that. But I remember it was like, again, this period of my life where it was also becoming clear to me that I was able to benefit from the way that I looked and the weight that I lost. And that now it wasn't just, people like noticing me on the street and things like that. It was like legitimate employment opportunities. And so it didn't make me excited. It didn't make me happy. It made me really depressed that now I was living a life that would never be available to me in a bigger body in so many different ways. And I was grappling with that. And I was very, really learning that for the first time. And so I bring that up because there was also a period, I was back in college for this, where I remember it was like, I said in the last episode that my mind was it felt infiltrated, and that my obsession became the way that other people were seeing me, because I was becoming aware of it for the first time. And then it became kind of everything. And so I remember my experience at this point, especially like I said, when I was at Michigan, was I was getting a lot of attention, like to the point where, and I've written a lot about this, to the point where like I would go places on campus and people would be like, you're the girl that lost a lot of weight, right? And again, that was really like exciting and cool. And also it really, I got lost in it. I got really, really lost in it. And it became an addiction like anything else. And so the other thing that I wrote down was I had this specific memory of when I was walking through the street one day, and there was a guy walking across the street, like we were passing each other, and he either didn't look in my direction like at all, or he glanced up at me for like a millisecond and then like looked away. And at this point, again, for the first time ever in my life, it felt like men were checking me out all the time. And I loved that. Oh my God, I loved that. I was getting a lot of attention, and it felt like I was making up for all the lost time. And so I remember this guy walking down the street who paid no attention to me. He maybe saw what I looked like and, didn't care. And I remember the thought that went through my head was, he must be gay. He must be gay. He seem interested in checking me out. He must be into guys. And then I heard that, okay, talk about ego dystonic. I heard that thought go through my head. And I remember being like, who are you? Like, who the fuck are you? What kind of thought is that? Like, what? And I was watching myself become so, again, compulsively interested not even obsessive, just interested in like, does this person think I'm attractive? Does this person think I'm hot? Like how is this person perceiving me? Because it was such a brand new concept. That's what I remember. And so again, it's just this like these moments to illustrate and capture what it was like for me to wake up. So this brings me 45 minutes into this episode. This brings me to the point that I want to make about, it brings me back to what I was saying a few episodes ago about how like we think that what we want is to be judged positively or for people to like and approve of and praise us. But ultimately, what that part of us is seeking and wanting is connection, internal connection from myself. And at this point, I can tell you that it's like I was losing myself in this being seen by other people. I was forgetting about myself. I was no longer defining myself by my values and my personality and who I was getting lost in how other people were seeing me. And so I understand now that what we really want, what I really wanted was to be seen and heard and present and connected with and to myself. And because I wasn't getting that from me, I was seeking it elsewhere. And this is why the opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of addiction is connection. What we are seeking when we are compulsively using food and drugs and alcohol and all the other things is ultimately connection with ourselves and with other people. But so this is why the point that I'm going to continue to make over the next few minutes is how it's not about swinging the pendulum from being negatively seen to being positively seen. It is about being or negatively judged to positively judged. What it really is, both of them miss being seen as a human, as a soul, as the spirit that you are, right? Okay. That's what real connection is about. And the important, I think, clarification is that this isn't to say that receiving compliments shouldn't feel good, or that there's something bad or wrong, or that, you know, if you receive a compliment, you get a quick dopamine hit, that it's pathological. That's not at all what I'm saying. And we are going to come back to that because I have a lot to say about receiving comments on your body, but we will return to that in a different conversation. But the point here that I find fascinating, having lived through what I've lived through, is that if you never come back to center, if you never come back to seeing yourself and connecting with yourself and genuinely with other people, then your concern, the preoccupation, goes from how are other people judging me negatively to how are other people judging me positively. So you can completely miss connection with yourself if you are so focused and preoccupied with what other people are thinking of you. And if you are, let's say, in a bigger body and you are so concerned with how other people are judging you negatively, and you never do the inner, deeper work to connect with yourself, you can lose all the weight. You can be in your ideal body, but where's that energy going to go? Where's that part going to go? What it's going to do is be equally, if not more, preoccupied and obsessed with how other people are judging you positively. Now you've lost all the weight. So it doesn't actually change anything. And so I experienced a lot of this where at first it was like, I didn't necessarily ever even really think, like I said, about going to the gym and how other people were looking at me when I was 300 pounds and like, do people think I'm gross? Do people think I'm this? None of that was on my radar yet. But then I lost the weight and all of this, praise and attention started coming in, that I started getting obsessed or that feels a little bit like a stretch, but like, again, preoccupied feels like the right word. I was preoccupied with, am I impressive? Like, am I being impressive to these people? Like when I go and I work out and I'm at the gym and stuff, are other people noticing how good I am? And it's like, it doesn't really matter if it's negative or positive. At the end of the day, it is all serving to disconnect you from yourself. And that again just feels really important to clarify, because this perception, the illusion of this end goal of like, I'll be happy when I lose all this weight. It's like, if you lose all this weight and then all you can ever think about is, are you good enough for other people? You are going to be arguably just as, if not more, totally fucking miserable in your life. So I remember the other thing I thought of was I posted a picture. This was it was around this time. I was at a low weight. And I posted this picture of myself, and the caption was, "What other people think of you is none of your business." And I put this up. I mean, I said this quote, episodes ago, but I remember putting up this picture. It was probably 2015, 2017, or something like that. And I remember it was actually a personal training client of mine, commented on the picture and said, even if those thoughts are positive in nature, like, is it still none of your business what other people think of you if it's positive? And I remember at the time even being like, yes, yes, even if it's positive, that's the whole point. What other people think of you is none of your business. And that's what I kept thinking about as I was like listening to this last episode and revisiting so much of this stuff, was that feels important, because again, when people, I think, hear what other people think of you is none of your business, it's the assumption that if other people are talking shit about you and negatively judging you, well, then you don't want to know about that. It makes no difference to you about that. But I also want to say that we need to have that same mindset and same perspective around if other people are judging you positively, because that can become, again, quite an addiction. That can become quite a slippery slope and such a rabbit hole that at the end of the day keeps you disconnected from yourself. And this is all what this is about. If you want to feel safe in your body as it is, you've got to be connected to your body as it is. You've got to be connected to yourself as a spiritual being living in your body as it is. And if you are so preoccupied with how other people are viewing you, negative or positive, you can't do that. You can't access and embody that. So the reason that I say all this is because I genuinely have come to see and believe that sometimes the biggest distraction from yourself, and the reason we have to pay attention to distractions from self, is because then again, it makes connection, presence, and therefore safety inaccessible. The biggest distraction from yourself and your healing and your well-being and your alignment is other people and the concern with what other people think of you. And so this is how it is all connected: internalized male gaze, internalized beauty ideal, fragmented consciousness. All of this is operating without our conscious awareness, where most of us are not aware that this is all happening. Okay. So if we've internalized the male gaze so much so that it affects us to the depth of shallow breathing and we don't feel safe in our bodies, we have to look at all of this. We have to be aware of all of this, and we've got to tell the truth about all of it. So I genuinely feel, like I said last time, like I had and have this like unfair advantage. Like I have my denial was a leg up that offered me an opportunity to move through this experience and see it all and start to put it all together the way that I have. So in addition to all of this being an invitation for you ultimately to reflect on and look at where you live in this, like how much real estate does the preoccupation with what other people are thinking of you take up in your head every day? Like, just tell the truth about that. How internalized is this curriculum of girlhood? And just start to notice that, because again, you can't do anything about something you're not aware of. And this is where it begins, the awareness. So the other thing that I want to talk to you about today, as a continuation of this, is that because I woke up and became aware of the social context and the privilege and the oppression and all of it, is that I have over the last decade had to consciously practice not being distracted, right? So you heard in my bodies paper when I was on semester at sea, it felt like my mind was infiltrated. I felt like I was looking through the world with someone else's eyes that was seeing things like bodies and weight. And so now it's like since then, right? That was 2014. Now my eyes are open. There's no going back. And that's the whole thing. Those of you especially that I've worked with and have gone through the Out of the Cave coaching program, you know, and we've said it before on this podcast, once you come out of the cave, you can't go back in. There is no unlearning it. You can't raise your consciousness and then go back. You can't. And so there is no going back. And I grieve that. Oh, I still to this day grieve that. But my point is, my eyes have been opened and I can't close them again. And now that I exist with my eyes open as a part of the social construct and living in the social context, I can get distracted by it in a way that I never did before. And I can notice myself getting my attention sucked out of me by things like the internalized male gaze that I spent my whole childhood kind of not even being aware of. So I want to talk to you about how I deal with that. How do I now live here in this world that is the way that it is? Is it the way that I want it to be? No. Is it the way that I think it should be? No. Do I have to grieve that constantly? Yes. But now it's like, okay, I'm moving through the world and I also have, this is so hard to articulate. It's like I'm moving through the world as I am now, awake, alive, aware, okay, woke. But there's also this part of me that because of where I've been, right, it's still so ego dystonic. So when my mind starts to wander, like it does in a meditation, when my mind starts to wander and I'm at the gym and I'm getting preoccupied with how other people are viewing me, positive or negative, I have to work on that. I have to practice not allowing myself to be distracted by other people's judgments or of my own internalized and self-objectification. And this is where I'm not moving through the world the way that I used to. I'm moving through the world like it seems most people are, especially women, where this is now a concern. This is where my thoughts are going. This is where my attention and energy is going. And I have to work on that. I have to be intentional about that. I have to bring myself back to myself. Again, very much like a meditation. My mind wanders. I bring myself back. I start objectifying myself. I remember who the fuck I am. I start thinking about how other people are viewing me. I remember that that is none of my business. But it is work. It is work to do that. It is intention behind that. I have to be awake and I have to be conscious about where my energy is going and where my thoughts are, because once again, no one can do this for me. No one can do this for you. And if you are objectifying yourself and all you're ever seeing or thinking about is bodies and how other people are judging you, the only person that can do anything about that is you. So I am in a place now where I have all these notes that I want to share with you about how I do it, because that's what this whole little sidebar situation of episodes is really about, is like, I am now moving through the world where I have to practice having an animal brain in a social context and what I've learned to do with that so that I can come back to myself and stay connected and ultimately embody safety. So I want to tell you how I do that so that you can practice that and potentially start integrating these things into your own lived experience to once again support you with feeling safe in your body and connected to yourself in your body. And at the same time, here we are at 59 minutes. And my goal is always to keep these around an hour. That doesn't always happen, obviously. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit pause/stop. I'm going to say that this is where we end this episode. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit here and I'm going to finish this. I'm going to call it out that I'm going to complete this today. So you, my friend, have made it to the end of this episode. And now you know exactly where we're going with this next week. So I really do invite you again to let all of this settle and marinate and see what comes to you. See what comes to you, because this is the whole thing. You have an animal brain in a social context, and you're also living in a construct of privilege and oppression and social identities. And that is definitely something worth paying attention to, because this is what I mean, again, when I'm talking about the macro to micro effect. How does things like your skin color and your religion and your gender and your sexual orientation and your income and your zip code, how do these, and your body, how do these things influence your experience of being a human? Because we can't be denial. We can't be in denial of this. We can't not look at this. This has got to be a part of the conversation. And this is why, again, kind of full circle, I love my training as a social worker, because the whole kind of premise of it is you see the person in the environment. I remember when I was thinking about going back to school, and I asked my therapist, my childhood therapist, who's gotten many shout outs on this podcast for really great reasons. I remember asking her about, psychology or social work. And what she explained to me was the reason that she went with social work was because it's the person in environment. And you're looking at, biopsychosocial. That's the assessment that we do. Biological, psychological, social, and spiritual. Like, we're looking at all these parts of the human. And so I love that I went from thinking that Sociology 101 was common sense 101 to being trained as a social worker, because this is everything. So invitation to see yourself as the person in environment. Your environment has a lot to do with it, obviously, and we can't separate those things. So I'm going to stop for now. I hope, as always, that this resonated, that it touched something in you, potentially woke something up in you. Please let me know thoughts, feelings, feedback, lisaschlossberg@gmail.com. And as always, please rate, review, subscribe, and share. All right. Have the best week of your whole life. I will see you next time.